Hello, everybody. So, we're halfway through the semester, past the halfway point now. Somebody was already there. Oh, I thought she was here. Yeah, week 5, halfway past we're past the halfway point. So things moving along quickly. It's a short week, but Monday and Wednesday is still normal, so we'll still have our normal class in here. But then a nice long weekend and hopefully a chance to relax before that last little stretch at the end of the semester. Hopefully, oftentimes Thanksgiving ends up being not the most relaxing holiday. There's usually lots of traveling and gathering with family members that only get seen once a year and that sort of thing. Hopefully you're able to relax a little before we get into the last couple weeks of class. Yes, and good food. So hopefully even if you can't relax, there's plenty of good food to be had this week. So we're moving on to another game engine today. And we'll be looking at it the rest of the semester. And good and bad points, still covering a large sample in the class, but I guess the bad point is y'all are probably noticing the Game Maker is really easy to work with and has some very convenient features and nice functionality. And now we're moving on to one that's going to be a lot more complicated to look at. But for the final project, I know last fall was the first time this course ran. A lot of people kind of chose to go ahead and use Game Maker for the proof of concept, the game portion of the final project. Remember, your final project is going to be a big proposal. You turn in a proposal this week for what you're going to make, but it's going to be a full proof of concept proposal, the industry standard for what you would take to a meeting with Nintendo or EA or in the comments in the grade book, I actually printed out the list of the top game development companies and have been copying and pasting two of them into everybody's grade book comments on those. But a meeting with one of those big companies where you'd be like, I want to make this game, play this first level and see that it's fun, and we need 27 programmers and $18,000 to make this happen in a couple months. That's what your final project is going to be, that sort of proposal. Sort of an industry standard, and that way you can make the big game that you've probably been thinking about for a long time instead of some small thing just because it'll fit in our time constraints. All you need is the one level or one region if it's an open world thing, first chapter, or other words that would work good for that. Introduction and a couple cutscenes. Just the basic part to show that it's going to be a fun game and an interesting story. People will enjoy it. And for that part, at least the first go around on the course, a lot of people did choose to go ahead and use Game Maker for that because that's the easiest one to put together a 2D thing. You probably noticed that was way easier to get a game together and then play a game. Hopefully you've noticed that by now. The homework for that's due this evening. So surely you've at least clicked around on it a little. Now we're going to move on to the next one we're going to look at for the rest of the semester, but it's we're going to look at it in 2D and then 3D, so it is kind of like two different things. So for the next 2 weeks, we'll be looking at 2D with the Unity engine, which is one of the big name ones. So you'll need to install that, and it installs a little bit different. So when you go and search for it like normal, you go look for download Unity. And what you get when you click this link is to download Unity Hub. So we don't actually go download the installer for the software like we normally would. We go download software that will allow us to install that software. So you want to download and install Unity Hub. And then that part's just normal normal software. Just hit download, run the installer. I see it's a .exe installer, so those are in the Wednesday night class this evening. Like we looked at last Wednesday, the installer, so we know that's going to have the wizard to step through instead of just all run automatically. I think we did that in the 200 level, the 200 class as well. I show making installers a lot. But, I know for certain we looked at an executable installer last Wednesday instead of an MSI. We just download and run that. Yeah, it's finished. By the time it wasn't finished. And after you run it, then you will have Unity Hub there on your computer. And we use this to set everything up. The game engine itself, we have to be a little more careful with those. Very first thing, I'm going to make a note here, since I just mentioned be careful with the game engine itself. I'm going to make a note. Make sure you write this down because it seems to be a problem over and over and over again. Do not update a game engine, and by a major game engine, you would be fine if you update a game maker, a game engine mid project. So if you're in the middle of a project, let's back it up. If you are in the middle of a project, and like all software, for some reason, it'll constantly pop up a message box that says, "Do you want to update?" An update's available. You can run the update now. You'll see those message boxes all the time. But do not do that on a major game engine in the middle of a project, because it will break your project and you'll have to start over. Updates on game engines are big deals. Big complicated things going on in the background. Huge physics engines, high level rendering pipelines. There's a lot of stuff going on there. And more often than not, if you're in the middle of a project and you run an update so that you have an updated version of an engine than you started that project with, you will have to start the project over because it's no longer compatible with the updates. So always wait till you finish the project. But or run multiple versions of the engine. We can run more than one engine. Right now, you all probably all have the same one. There was the example from VR the other day. It ended up only being like, bless you, like 25 minutes, but we still, we had a plane to stand on and it was colored green, and then a cube and a sphere for the hands waving around with like laser beams shooting out of them. And you could look around the 3D world, but it was a flat plane. But in 20 minutes, we got that going. So that went pretty well. We'll probably look at it, at least how to set the settings. Because once the settings are there, it's normal 3D game development, except for what the controller does. So normal 3D game development, our controller can click on stuff, right? But with VR, we can click on stuff and grab stuff. So we have an extra thing our controller can do, and we have to distinguish between them. Otherwise, it's normal 3D game development once you get past the settings. And they have really nice libraries already built for us. So really what we're talking about anytime we say game engine is what we saw with Pygame. A bunch of libraries that we could import into our own script and start writing all that stuff. But they're huge, massive things that are hard to work with. There's a lot going on and a lot of room for typos to happen. A lot to memorize. It's in a lot of ways it's nice to have stuff on a GUI. So that's what we're going to work with in Unity. We'll work with the Unity Unity editor is the words that are going to show up. Because UI, user interface, anything about the user interface, that's going to show up a lot, right? All over game development. With the game engine, the game itself, the thing running the game, lots of user interfaces going on. So help distinguish it. The word Unity editor will refer to the user interface for the game engine. And then we still have the ability to write our own scripts and customize things. So unlike what we saw in Game Maker, where we were doing it all in the interface, it's going to be a nice looking mix. So projects is where we'll normally go. Right down under there's install. So here's one that I currently have one version of the Unity game engine installed. 2021 3.11 F1. And then LTS stands for long-term support. So you definitely want to get one that says long-term support. And this one's set up to export for Android, to web pages, or to run on a Windows machine. So we also have to be machine specific. It's not one game that's going to run everywhere. That's the build anyway. So for now, probably start off with your own system. If you're on a Windows machine, set it up to run on a Windows machine. If you're on a Mac, set it up to run on a Mac. It will not cause any problems when I go to grade it, because by the first one I grade, I'll know who has a Mac and who has a Windows, and just run it on the appropriate one to version. Version control is a big deal. Y'all probably didn't download 2021.3.11 F1. That was last October. So that was 13 months ago. That's probably not the one y'all downloaded, which means there might be some incompatibilities between that one and the one y'all downloaded. So I'm going to put another one on here, whatever the newest version is. Not the newest version, the newest long-term support version. Long-term support means it's been out for a little while. They feel confident that they found most of the bugs, and a specific team has been assigned to maintain that piece of software as more bugs are found. Whereas there's going to be one, sometimes two newer versions in the LTS version, but those are ones that even the people at Unity aren't confident they found all the bugs, and you don't want to be a beta tester. Unless you do want to be a beta tester. Right? If you want to be the one that helps them find the bugs in the latest version of Unity and try out the new features, then look for the newest one. Otherwise, we want to install an editor. You might need a license. So to get a license, locate. The buttons are dynamic. If you have to get a license, just click the download the license button and go to Unity and download your personal license and use that. And it does go per person. That's the reason I leave the game dev classes as blended, to kind of indicate that they're not available on the GRE computers, because it's very, very problematic in a computer lab like we have here. It would have to be reinstalled on the machine you're sitting at each particular day, which did that in the Android Studio class a couple of years ago. It wasn't impossible, but it was a little inconvenient to lose the first 15 to 20 minutes of class every single day. It's a very short number of class periods, so that's the reason I still leave the blended label on there to indicate. Make sure you have your own equipment. And then you'll see the ones on here. 2021, 23.14 F1 as an LTS. 2020. Well, this is at least newer than the one I have. So 2022. So yeah, there's two newer ones. If you just want to, but you can see they're labeled as the beta testers and alpha testers. Probably don't want to be an alpha tester unless you know a whole lot about game engines. Unless you've already read through most of the code for the original code for the Unity game engine. You don't want to be an alpha tester. A beta tester is helping the developers find the bugs. But that will probably move to long-term support here fairly soon. 2021 314 was the just because I was teaching this class at that time, that was the second one that came out last December. So I guess it was probably intended to come out early in 2022, but they rushed it out early and gave it the 2021 number. So it looks like that's the latest long-term support. So you want to install that. So click install and choose software that goes with it. I would recommend against Visual Studio. I don't like Visual Studio in general. Some of y'all may have heard me say that, but it is a specific reason this time. We write our code in C#, which is a Microsoft specific language, but it gets compiled differently. We just use C# syntax. It's actually C++ code that we need. So we can't run it through the normal compiler. But since it's Microsoft's proprietary language, the official Microsoft IDE Visual Studio is always going to be the top recommendation for a type C# language. But that has Microsoft compiler in it. So if we go with Visual Studio, we have to wait for our code to compile twice every single thing we do. It's going to run through the Microsoft compiler, and then we have to go back over to Unity and run through the Unity compiler. So I would recommend unchecking that. But some people like Visual Studio, if you just really like Visual Studio, it doesn't take that long to compile something twice. Difference between 45 seconds and a minute and a half. It's not like you're going to have to wait an hour on anything. But with the official Microsoft compiler, that's not the compiled C# version. It runs through a different compiler. It's more than one way we can put machine code together. A little beyond the scope of this course, but I'm going to recommend against that. It also moves really slow. Look at the size of that. So this is the smallest possible version of Visual Studio there is. 1.27. So it's a 1.27 gigabyte text editor. That's what I generally dislike about it. The regular version is like 15 gigabytes. Like, no, I do not want a 15 gigabyte text editor. I'll take the one that's like 100 kilobytes. Actually, the text editor I use, Sublime, makes use of a GPU. So, and a DPU, but I don't have one of those on this computer. So I think it's a better text editor all around because Visual Studio can't use a GPU. So I would recommend unchecking that. And we have to choose. It will automatically be the platform you're downloading it on. Notice I don't have an option for Windows because I'm downloading on a Windows machine. If you're on a Mac, you'll probably see an option for Windows, but not an option for Mac. It does recognize the machine it's on. And then the other ones can be added later. So I would actually recommend just leaving all the boxes unchecked here and install the small version and add more stuff as you need it later. Hopefully it won't take too long. There is a lot of waiting with this. So it's a big, powerful one. It's actually built from the same pipeline as Python. There's a library called OpenGL and a subset of it called WebGL that are immensely popular if you ever want to go to the core libraries yourself and build one. And that's like the 3D rendering, a lot of the rendering stuff. And the game engines that we know almost all started with OpenGL and just extended that, built other stuff on top of it, along with some physics engines and what's generally considered one of the best physics engines is bullet physics. So we also have that. I'll look that up while that downloads. Bullet physics. And this is the thing that handles all of the physics interactions in the game. They already downloaded the library and they built that into Unity. And it's a collection of a bunch of existing components that they extended. Extended as an object-oriented programming. They made a child class that added more stuff to it. So they started with the best rendering pipeline and physics engine objects, and then made child classes and customized it, made it better. And that's sort of Unreal is the same thing. Also, OpenGL and Bullet Physics. Those are the top tier ones. And then they extended it and made it a lot better. They have a much better rendering pipeline. Writing code would be about equivalent, but it's high-end rendering is the slow part of the graphics. For the modeling, that's what takes forever. Like that's why the credits in movies go on and on and on and on and on, because of all the time it takes for all the high-end rendering, and they have to have so many graphic designers there working on the movie. The credits go on for a long ways. You watch an old movie from the 70s, there's like 2 or 3 minutes of credits. And nowadays it's pretty common to put another scene or two in the middle of the credits because it takes 15 minutes to get through the credits. Just because there's so many names on there. And so Unreal, as far as coding your game, would be about the same. But taking advantage of the really good graphics there is the time-consuming bottleneck. It takes a long time to make sure your mist is flowing correctly down the hill. We've all seen foggy mornings. You know, fog doesn't rolls in certain directions. Make sure that looks correctly. Which way does fog roll? Or roll, it's not flowing. Right? It goes down the hill and back up and down the hill and back up. And usually lengthwise until the whole cloud moves up or down. It's not moving down towards the ground or back up. It's sort of like swirling in place and going the length of the hill instead of up or down. And if you're trying for realism in your game and you don't get that right, it's not going to look real. You completely lose the realism. So I like cartoonish because it's so much more freedom. But at times, for some games, realism is very important. But what really matters is that it's a fun game, right? It's kind of fizzled out, but a couple years ago, just the popularity of Among Us. Such widespread popularity. It wasn't because of great graphics, wasn't because of intensive storyline that really sucked you in. It was because it was just fun to sit down with your friends and play the game, play around. Which is actually the Turing test. That's the standard thing to check for AI. Machines are awful at that, trying to figure out who's lying. Humans are very good at it. And, even the best machines completely fall apart at it. So this one's going to download. I'll go ahead and open the other one. See where it's going. Once it downloads, it just runs, but you can see it's going to take a while to download it. 53%. It's only about halfway, but I have another editor installed. So I can just go back to the other editor and create a project. So we can point at buttons. But that one that just downloaded is the one that you should have. So you should have available when you, it's the latest long-term support version. And if we click project, okay. So once it's installed, once your editor's installed, under project, just hit a new project and choose a template, 2D or 3D. There's some more advanced templates, but some of them are very specific for very specific things. So I do microgaming assignments. I might have to check. At one point I was thinking about doing the micro gaming. I think I changed my mind about it. If for those assignments, you would just click on this and it's built in here, and then the learn, the tab over here that says learning. Most everything we do, we want one of these basic two, either 2D or 3D. We'll start with 2D for the first couple weeks. And then over here on the right is where we give it a name. I'll just leave it my project number 1. Because first thing I'm going to do is point around at the editor. And now more waiting. So that's that newest version is downloaded in the background. I don't think there was any changes to the editor. Any major changes to the general stuff I'm going to point out today will still be valid. And hopefully it won't take too long, but there is a large number of things it does. And it's probably not helpful for you all at this point in learning game development. But one of the biggest reasons that Unity took off really well is because they always use the proper name for everything. They use the actual name for it, even if it's something that a lot of people would have no idea what you're talking about. Like quaternions. We want to rotate stuff, we have to go in and use quaternions. And some people see those in 400 level math classes, but most people don't see those till 500 or 600 level math classes. So most people don't take 500 or 600 level math classes, so they don't ever see the word quaternion, and it only shows up in game development and how we handle rotations. Angles are not unique for something I can rotate. I had like a little ball, it might work better, but we have something that we need to rotate in space. You're probably used to degrees, so we could spin like 30 degrees this way and then 20 degrees this way and get that rotation. But that's not the only way we could go. And what's more, order matters. So if I go 20 degrees this way and then 30 degrees this way, we're not pointing in the same direction. We did 30 degrees and then 20. So rotation by degrees is not unique. Okay. What I do, I did 30 degrees forward and then 20 degrees over. So I could also do 330 degrees the other way and 340 degrees around that way and get back to that original spot. So angles are not unique. Quaternions give us a unique 3D rotation. There's for any vector that we point in space, there is one and only one way to describe it. Kind of an important thing. So proper names like that, even if it's harder for the game development. Stuff labeled on the interface, we'll see that. And the labels in the interface are drawn right from our code. So when we look at this here in a second, there's a lot of buttons. It's going to seem overwhelming. It's also dynamic. As you start writing code, that the Unity editor interface will change on you. Oh, I have to click yes. I guess that other one might be almost installed. Okay, so it finished downloading, so now it's just verifying the installer and all that. And for those who were in the class the other night, when we looked at installers, you'll notice after you install Unity Hub, we had a wizard to walk through and click options. But when we install the actual Unity editor, the version we want of that, there's no options, it just runs and it's there. So different types of installers. Did I share my screen? Probably not. Nope. Share screen. So that one finished downloading and now it's actually installing. I can get Hub out of the way. So we're not restricted on our editors, and here's what the Unity engine looks like. their Unity editor looks like. The engine is a bunch of code libraries, written in C++ and C#. Really, we want C++, but C# is a subset of C++, and we are forced to write code better in C#. So sometimes that's just used to force the developer to write nice, clean code. We have no restrictions in C++. We can tell the machine to do whatever we want. So we end up with some really, really messy code sometimes. It's kind of that. And that's why I recommend against the Visual Studio thing, because if you use the Microsoft compiler, we have to recompile it afterwards for the Unity compiler. And then there's twice as much waiting on anything to happen. And waiting is boring. You don't want to wait. Let's see. Try to get that out of the way, kind of out of the way. Oh, I'll have to be moving thumbnails off. So this is the default layout. Make sure and put it in the default layout. You can see that on the screen. Let me get these thumbnails out. Yeah, I think I can leave that area open. I should do that over on this one too. But, these I'm gonna have to move around a lot more. So a couple different areas. Maybe I should plug them up in. That way I can annotate things. But you'll immediately notice there's a lot of buttons on here. A lot of different things going on, and we're not even seeing a tenth of them that are on by default. There is a lot more that we can start controlling and customizing and setting up, and it's dynamic. So when we start doing things in our scripts, it will change this interface as well. It will change the editor interface as well. The main places we're going to work, I'll just kind of go around and grab, oh, not stop share. I was trying to grab my little pen. Got the pen. The buttons tried to disappear, and then suddenly the stop share button was where the pen button was a split second earlier. So up here at the top is some menu stuff. We'll look at that in here shortly. We're going around over here is our scene hierarchy. So here's all of our nodes in the scene, and it's a hierarchy like a file structure. There's different ways we can put hierarchies together. We could have trees, binary trees, lots of different trees, but this is more like a file structure where we can have, I guess it is still a type of tree, but we can have lots of different options and things can be imbalanced. There's two folders over here. And sort of the way the folders would go together. Obviously, it's not written that way. That would be a mess to try to click our way through, right? It's the normal collapse and expand that we see written vertically. But we'll also see hierarchies written this way. So it's that sort of hierarchy to our structure. There's that. There's a scene root, and then everything else is a child of that, and we can nest child objects inside of that, and a lot of nesting going on. But this area shows our hierarchy. So that's listing out everything in our scene and how it's connected, sort of the order of it.
Like the different layers.
No, not like layers. We have layers. Layers or something. Layers are like layers. It's like files. Like when
So it's like files that have.
like when File Explorer shows you all the documents on your computer.
It's like you have the file, and then you have all the stuff inside.
Yes. That sort of structure. But that's where you'll see all the stuff that is currently in the scene, because we have more than just the current scene going on. Then in the middle, we have our editor. So here's where we'll edit stuff. let me make a quick picture. Here it is. Pop that so I can use regular mouse, and I'll just do a quick picture in Microsoft Paint or something. Go to Paint, and that'll work. I can let it zoom in, is it? Oh, I'll make it a little bit bigger and grab maybe, I don't know, a crown. That's a good color for it. Grab a yellow crown and quickly draw a smiley face here. Yellow, black. There we go. Get us a picture to work with, nothing too fancy. And I'll stick this over in the delete folder. Lots of different things we can do. There's a lot of drag and drop options. So I'm going to come over to that little picture I just made and just drag it right in here. I'm going to delete it before long so it's unorganized. It's down here at the bottom. I'm going to turn the fade back on. Down here at the bottom is our project explorer. And this is like a file explorer. So the hierarchy is the things in the current scene that we're looking at, the current scene of our game. And the project explorer is the files, actual getting in the files. We haven't worked with them yet or backup. That way we don't have to go use other software in order to adjust things. We'll see a lot more later, but and take this and drag it up here and add it to the scene. You'll notice it showed up in the hierarchy. There's this, that picture has been turned into a sort of game object. We can do things with it now. If I delete it, you can also drag it over here. I can drag it in either place and get it set up. Probably notice immediately that when I drug it over to the main scene area, our main editing area, it just stayed wherever I dropped it. When I drug it to the hierarchy, it immediately went to 0, 0, 0. That's usually when I decide where to drag it to. If it needs to go to the origin or start at the origin, or I'm going to manually type the numbers in, I'll go to the hierarchy and just let it drop to 0, 0, 0. Otherwise, I'll try to kind of place it in. But we can drag it in, and we'll do all our editing there, resize it, move it around, have lots of different things going on, set it on layers. We have multiple kinds of layers. Jared, since you're quite curious about that, so we have visibility layers. That's what you have in Photoshop. But we also have interaction layers and physical layers, and internally what it is multiple arrays, and we put the same data in different ones. It's just a reference to it. So it's ways to organize it. So we could have like an enemy layer. And really what that is a giant array where we put all of our all the mobs for the game. And then when we need to check a collision, we don't have to check with every single enemy in the game. We can just check and see if we hit anything on that enemy layer. So really, layers aren't just an array, a way of organizing things.
So, so say you had an orc, and he had certain types of weapons. So in the hierarchy, would all those weapons fall under that orc?
It could. It depends on the situation. Sometimes they would. Sometimes they would be separate objects. Like, can he drop the weapon and somebody else pick it up? Because in that case, you probably wouldn't want it to be part of the org.
Right, but I'm thinking in a hierarchical system.
Yes, in a hierarchical system, that would probably make sense.
Weapons.
As well as like armor. Yeah.
Right, so that would place it.
As a child.
As
Yes.
as a child in the hierarchy.
Yes. Yes. And we will see some of that soon.
But it wouldn't necessarily be a layer. It would just be.
Oh, it would still be his layer. So layers are more for organizing things. Layers are more of a background thing. Like we'll look at all the layers, but like like interaction layers, we can define that some things will interact or won't interact with each other. Certain parts of the game automatically know or do not know about each other. Or visibility layers, some things are just automatically closer or further away. We don't have to worry about it.
So in terms of hierarchy, there would be attributes
Mm.
of the org. In terms of layers, they would be
They would,
relative to the placement in the three-dimensional
yeah, yes,
game.
yes,
Game.
yes, they wouldn't need their own layers. The org would have a layer. But the, anything that the org was carrying would just go on the org's layer. Come along with it as a child. I think that makes sense. And speaking of attributes, that's all the stuff over here. So this is gonna be one of our big panels where we do most of our work. The inspector panel, which we had an inspector panel in Game Maker. We didn't really spend a whole lot of time there because we had other ways to get to the same thing. But you'll notice this is for that image that's selected. Here is all the data we have about it. So that up at the top, everything starts as a transform. We have some data about the position, rotation, and scale. Where everything's located, X and Y, because right now we're in a 2D template. The Z does give us closer and further away. So layers exist, and that's where we're going to talk about them. I tend to never use them myself. I just use the Z axis because it's a 2D game, so we're looking at the X and Y, and it is for Unity 2D. It is like our math class. So our Y axis goes up, and our X axis goes to the right. And just check numbers. I might have drew that backwards. Let's check. Let's check instead of just drawing that. So if I try changing these numbers, so like X is 0, 0. If I go to 10, we can see positive 10 moves to the right of the screen, or a negative 10 moves to the left. Go back to 0. Switch to 10 on the Y, positive 10 is up, negative 10 is down. And I guess the important thing is notice how easy that check is to do. Just punch in some numbers that are obvious and confirm it instead of trying to remember what it was last time you used the engine or when somebody told you. Really easy to check things. And notice the labels: position, rotation, scale. And when we get to scripting, this game object right here already has a transformed data field in it. And that transform has, this is called Smiley. So when we get to scripting, we already have, well, I'll circle on the names here. We already have Smiley, well, my pen's not on. Turn my pen on. We have Smiley dot transform dot position dot Y if we want to get to it. So that's one of the things that made Unity very popular, is every word we need in our script is written on the interface. Everything's named properly and written on the interface. So at least in theory, you don't have to go look up anything. It's already written on the interface itself. Don't try to do that in practice. Unity has great documentation, wonderful, wonderful forums, tons of tutorials, excellent documentation, a huge fan base that is constantly making YouTube videos. So there's better places to look. But at least in theory, every word we need is already written on this interface for us to look at. And like here, all we did was make that picture. We grabbed the ping image and drug it in there, and it became a game object. And that game object has a name, has transform data, has a sprite renderer because there's an image. I'm gonna do more, clear those. Oh, turn off annotation so I can get to the mouse and, I'll add in a rigid body 2D. So everything is labeled, either has a normal label or it has 2D afterwards. And the words on the interface have spaces. Ignore spaces when you get to the code. So rigid body 2D is one word over in the code, or here, smiley.sprite-render.draw mode in Pascal case, just jam together, equals simple. So the words we need for our code are already written here. Rigid body 2D, rigid body is what has our laws of physics. So by default, it's dynamic, simulated, has some sort of mass, interpolate. If I extend this out, you can see there's a bunch of position, velocity, and angular velocity, and things from laws of physics, and they did follow all the proper names from physics instead of just what would be convenient for a programmer. They put a lot of effort into kind of really doing it properly. So that has physics on it now. If I come over here and hit run, see the run button, and notice we'll jump to the other tab, and it has physics, so gravity took over and it just headed straight down. The default is going to be a platform. Your gravity is pulling downward. Your objects are going to try to fall that way, and you have to jump upward to get away from gravity and things like that. So you see the two tabs.
Actually, looking at the Y when you dropped that, it just kept dropping forever.
Yes, nothing stops it. We should probably stop it. So yeah, we're just looking at stuff. We're just looking at stuff now. So let's make some place for that to fall onto. Microsoft Paint open still again. So I'll make a new one, and I'll grab my not airbrush, use the crown. I'll use a green crown to make some land. There we go. There's some land for the character to fall on. That way he doesn't just fall forever. Which, yes, like, and what Bradley just pointed out, I was going to point out here in a couple seconds. It's a good eye. And if I drag that in, and then bring that here, and I'll just stretch it out so that it covers the whole thing. Different ways we can stretch it out, and notice once again we have land.transform.position.x when we need to start scripting with it. We can read the stuff right off there, which from the first two game engines that we looked at, probably already realized that's the one you're going to need the most often, right? Our transform data is the first one we always go to. This one could apply some laws of physics, but what we really need is to make sure there's a bounding box. So whenever you go to add a component, we get a fuzzy finder. So it's the search box. It's not super advanced search like we get with Google's search engine, but it's not a simple control F either. So that fuzzy middle ground has it's better than just control F. So if we start looking for things, like a box, you'll see box slider and box slider 2D. So I'll put like some collision bounds and edit that and see by default, it just set it to the same size as that picture. I'm pushing F and scrolling a little, make that box a little smaller. Oops. Which is probably kind of hard to see there. Yeah, it's not showing up on the screen at all. There's a very light thing sitting on top of the white, grabbing some little handles so that we don't need all that white background. There we go. Make just the size of our thing. Then I'll scroll out. If you have a mouse, if you hold Alt, you can do panning and Control Alt, Shift Alt. I can't remember which one the other one is. If you use the buttons, you can move things. Back clicks. Right, alt right click. Then control click is trying to pan. Well, it's another one you probably want a regular mouse for control. We'll go over that in more details before long. So I put a laws of physics and a boundary around this one. So gravity is going to try to pull it down. So as long as this has a boundary as well, and the last search is still there, so I'll just add a box slider. Looks by default, it looks like it's rounded that whole shape. So now when it starts falling, we should see that number go up. And if you watch the transform data, did you see that changing? Because I'll select this one so we're looking at the right one. And maybe drag it up a little so it falls for a while. Oh. So I got past the screen. But if you keep an eye on the transform data there when it runs, you'll notice that when it's debugging, we have that connection. So we can watch what those values are. Very, very useful in debugging. But you can see we've already got some interaction on there. All we did was drag a couple images around, set something around it, and to quickly get movement, we just say, okay, physics applies to this. We have gravity and things start falling downward automatically on their own. There's a few more steps we'll need to do, but we spend a lot of time over in the inspector with our different components. And there's a lot on there. Animation things, audio things, effects, events, layouts. You're gonna want to spend a little bit of time just clicking around arbitrarily, trying to get used to things. And I'm in the default layout here. So just open it up, and this is what you should see at first, and we have control over that. Maybe you're like, okay, I don't want the hierarchy over here. Got that hierarchy, and stick the hierarchy down here by the files, and then there's more room for the game stuff. I don't want to look at the inspector vertically and stick the inspector horizontal across the top. We have complete control over that. Make it look different. Try different things, see what layout you like, but when you getting started, it's hard to know exactly which tools you're going to need, right? So the big thing for that is you try different things out. Up in the top left, see the menu that says layout, or a drop down here, it might say something different. Here is how you can restore the layout to a different one. And when you find one you like, you can also come over here and save the layout you like, so that if you start changing it around, you can get back to other layouts, get back to another layout you like. That's an important button because you're going to want to try different things. And we have more windows we can turn on. There's my animation window. Turn on animator here. And there's two parts. There's an animator and an animation. This one's not even docked. It's floating freely. We have a lot of tools here. Lots and lots and lots of buttons. Obviously, we're going to look at those two before long. But I wanted to just start clicking on things. And here's our scene editor, and right next to it is the game scene. This is what the camera can see. Looks like the hierarchy collapsed. So we have that main camera, just basically looking straight at our scene. Over here, the white line, that white box is the border of what the camera can see. So as you go in and change camera settings, the camera also has a transform data. And notice the camera is at -10 on the Z. So that's how I usually set things up instead of layers. I'll put the camera's at -10. And the background is a positive 10. So negative 10 is towards us, coming out of the screen. Positive 10 would be like going into the screen. And then we have all that range in between on the Z-axis to layer the interaction in the game components. That's how I usually set it up. There's also layers for a more formal way to do that. Different things about the camera, the aspect ratios, and lots of control we have over that. This tab that opened here, I'll use this. Notice there's no little X button. There's no little X to close that tab. Where that's at is over on the ellipsis button. Over in the right-hand corner of every panel, there's that dot, dot, dot. The more button. Click that. That's where the close for a particular panel is. So a good first step is just clicking around, getting used to the using the engine, because there's a lot of it going on. So top left, go around clockwise again. The top left has the hierarchy, all of the stuff that is in our current scene. And then in the middle, in the default view, has the scene editor and the scene preview, basically. If you want to see what the camera sees, you can go over to the game tab, because this is what the camera is looking at. Background is moving and everything. The scenes for editing, the game is what the camera sees. Obviously, the little triangle is the normal symbol for a run button. And it's also a stop button. They don't change the icon on it. But when you want to stop the run, hit that same button. So it's toggles on and off. Definitely want to click around. Over on the right is the inspector, and that has all of the properties about the current thing selected in the hierarchy or the scene. Zoom in and out and panning. Oh yeah, I guess we don't have rotation. I was in there looking for the rotation shortcut earlier, couldn't figure out why it wasn't working. We only have rotation in 3D, don't we? We can't rotate around a two-dimensional world. We can only look straight at a 2D world. We're not doing 3D yet. That's still a week and a half away. But scrolling it out, and if you hold Alt and click on the mouse pads, like on a laptop, we'll do that. But clicking the middle wheel, the scroll wheel, clicking that middle button on your mouse will handle your panning, and then the mouse wheel handles a lot of that navigation. Got our properties, and then down at the bottom is all of our basically a file explorer, so a way to navigate through the folders, files and folders from here in Unity. And organization goes a long way. Notice by default, all we have is one folder called scenes, or there's a folder called assets, and in assets, there's one folder called scene, which has our sample scene. Cancel that, but I probably should save. Remember to save often. Two more things, three more things. Well, two of them are almost the same. A place where we will spend a lot of our time is configuring with configurations for the game. If you go to the edit menu and project settings, here are most of the settings for the projects. So like on input manager, there's this thing called axes, and we already have like a horizontal axis, which is the default for your system. So whatever the left and right buttons are for your system, which is on a laptop here is going to be the left and right arrows, as well as the A and B keys. Double mapping. I'd have to dig through to a more complicated, even more complicated looking thing to show that Xbox controls are already mapped. So if you plug up an Xbox controller, the game's gonna recognize it. All that stuff's mapped and we can change it. It's like, I don't want to use the A key. I want to make it hard for the user, so I'm gonna use the Y key instead of the A key for the normal left. You would do that, but we have control over that. We can rename, we can change what buttons we use for each one, different things. Like fire 1 is the left control, or jump is the space bar. Then when we start scripting, that control is named jump. So in our script, we use the jump button. We ask for it by the name jump. Or left control is our first fire button. So the control button over here, we can ask for that specifically by saying the fire 1 button. And then when we switch to an Xbox controller or PlayStation controller, the jump button and fire 1 key is pretty well defined on both of those, right? There's a standard that is going to be your jump or your or the first fire button. It's the one on the left of the diamond, left middle of the diamond on both Xbox and PlayStation. That would be your fire 1, and then your jump is at the bottom of the diamond shape on the right side. Right, they're well defined unless the programmer remaps it. Lots and lots of presettings. We will spend a lot of time over here, so this is where we do a lot of configuration. And when it's finished and you're ready to build it, you go to build and then build it for the platform you want. So any scenes you want to add, make sure they're in this list. And notice the only way we can add them to this list is one that says add open scene. So if you have 10 scenes, we only see one in that list. You have to open them one at a time and click add open scene to the build settings. Choose the system you want to build it for, set up the other configurations, and then go ahead and make the build. That's the final version. Android will have a good button for it. And notice that it's not just a basic build, it will build the proper bundle for the Play Store, Amazon Store, whatever store you're actually heading to. So not just the device it's going to run on, but the store, but how you're going to distribute it to that device. And speaking of that, we have an asset store right here in Unity. Unity has an asset store where if we need game assets, images and sounds and pre-made things that don't really have an image associated with them, but will be very, very useful for our game, we can get it right from Unity. If you go to the Window tab, you'll see the Asset Store. And yeah, it opens a panel here. We used to be able to do it right here, but now they replace that with just a search online button. Like there's no way you're running Unity on something that doesn't have a browser. Use your browser. Your browser's going to take up the whole screen, and then they can do a better a display like any store. You can only promote so many projects here. And yeah, always open the browser, but go over here, there's a Unity store, like any store, Black Friday sales. Some of this, I signed in. Okay. So there's sort of a two-part process. So my assets. So here's things I've already grabbed from the store. Mostly free things. But maybe we need some 2D characters. So we can start looking 2D characters, go through the filters. Quite a few there, $25, $55, $40. The first thing I'm going to do is come over and find the price filter. And the price filter, and I'm just going to click free assets. Okay, so here's some 2D characters. some sort of dragon warrior, looks like a bunch of animation. I don't need the 25% off coupon for free stuff, but, so we have there's a spreadsheet here, all the animations we need for this character. Or maybe it's all the animations. And when you first pick something, the button will say add to my assets or buy it. And yeah, they just changed their service terms of agreement, so they're gonna make sure that you have read their new terms of agreement. Does it added it to my assets? Oh, I guess the button's right here. Okay, the button went away. If I go to my assets, I was kind of slow, so here's that asset that I just shopped around for, found, said, okay, this is the one I want to use in my game. And over on the right is this button, open in Unity. So when we click that, it will go ahead and bring it, open up another window here called Package Manager, and bring it right in so we can access it in our project. Why am I not signed in? Okay, because that's it. I should be signed in. Project. Yeah, I have no idea why it tells me I'm not signed in. Or what's going on over here. Opening it. Well, I don't know why it's not showing over here. There should be a list here that looks like I'll go to another one. It looks like stuff like this, so if we want to use it, we would just choose it from the list. So like say Cinema Machine, that's one we'll look at soon. In the registry. And then we just hit install and that adds it into our project. I don't know where that one I just downloaded from the store was or why it thinks I'm not signed in because I had to be signed in order to open the editor. Again, with the sign in button doesn't do anything. So I'll have to look into that later. It should be right here when you download those assets from the store. They open right in your game, and then it'll be like this. You just grab it off the menu and hit install. And after it installs, then there's a remove button. And you'll have all sorts of stuff going on. In this particular one, that thing I just did, added some stuff to that menu, but it hasn't restarted yet. There it is. So that thing I just randomly selected on added to the menu there. That wasn't there a moment ago, but I guess y'all have to take my word for it that that wasn't there 5 minutes ago. Same thing with assets though. I'll look into why that I'm not signed in because that doesn't really make any sense. So a lot going on. It can be overwhelming. The first thing you're going to do is just kind of start clicking around. But I think we could probably do a follow along example today to get started. But, great. 10 minutes sound good to everybody. There's a big head nods here in the classroom. It was probably a similar thing over on the Zoom call. So my laptop here says 2:10. So we'll get started back at 2:20. I'll see y'all in just a moment. And give me a drink. Coffee somewhere.